We acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the gathering grounds of many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked this land and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Hello and welcome back to Research Recasted, the Knowledge Mobilization podcast. I'm your host, Brooklyn Logician, and today we are joined by Rayanne Haines. Rayanne Haines is an award-winning author, pushcart-nominated poet, and producer of films, stage shows, and panels. She's an assistant professor in arts and culture management at MacEwan University and hosts the literary podcast Crow Reads. Her 2021 poetry collection, Tell the Birds Your Body Is Not a Gun, won the Stephen G. Stevenson Alberta Literary Award. Her poetry memoir, What Kind of Daughter, releases October 2024. Well, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm actually very excited because the Arts and Culture Management program was my first program at MacEwan.
Was it?
First one I graduated with, yeah.
Wow, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah. It was a really good program. And then I was really young, so I didn't really know what to do yet. So I went back and did another program.
Yeah.
And it was during COVID, so there was not many arts things to do.
There wasn't.
Yeah.
It was a hard time for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Not about me anymore. So let's get into your research. You kind of mentioned in our pre-interview that you work with both practice-based and arts-based lenses. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah, I'm now regretting that I said that because now I have to explain it. So because I am a writer, an author, and also a performer, I kind of consider them almost like separate identities or separate ways of exploring something that I want to interrogate. So for me, when I'm writing or creating poetry or creating a story, to me, that's an arts-based lens that I'm using. So I'm not, doing a literature review for my questions that I'm trying to solve. I'm trying to answer the questions by creating the art that then leads to more questions. And then the practice-based, I would say that's when I am like physically holding a space or physically in a space, performing the art and in turn viewing how the audience is perceiving it. Or, if I'm performing a particularly difficult piece or something that has some really challenging material, I want to see how that's affecting the people that are viewing it. In that space, in that time, right? So I think that that's the way I consider them differently. So one is like the exploration through the creation, and then the other is the exploration based on audience response and what that may lead to in other questions.
Could you give an example from a piece of work that you've done?
So I have one particular poem that has a lot of vulgarity in it, a lot of swear words, but it's all meant to be in service to understanding women's rights or kind of what I call purity culture. And so when I'm writing that, I'm writing through the exploration of this new, I can't say new, I'm writing through the exploration of this time in the world that we're in where purity culture feels like it's really, really being shoved down the throats of women. And when I'm performing it and trying to understand the responses that I'm having from men and women in the audience, right? Cool. Are they there with me or are they pulling back? And what does that mean for me then as this performer or around this conversation?
And what has some of the responses been to that?
I think, most of the time women certainly are right there with me. Yeah. And, sometimes men or even younger women have a harder time kind of getting there. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of get that because right now it's like demure is a trend. Yeah. And me and my friends are like, we will never be the demure girls.
No. No trad wives in training.
No trad wives in training. Unfortunately, that is really good research now, because that's a big social media thing for my generation, is that kind of purity lens.
Yeah.
Moving on a little bit, we were kind of talking about central themes and objectives of your experimental story collection.
Mm-hmm.
What are those?
So I tend to have a lot of the similar themes. So this is a story collection that I actually received funding from the Canada Council to write this particular novel. And it's really it's a genre novel where I'm looking at a dystopian future, but kind of based in some of the things we've already been talking about, I don't want to say purity culture, but where the right to choose is almost taken away, where there is no right to choose because of XYZ has happened and we must procreate in order to repopulate, right? It's a pretty standard theme. But I think that the way I'm looking at it and writing it is asking that question in a little bit deeper level, where in the collection itself, members of the LGBTQ plus to SIA community are told they cannot, there is no allowance for their quote unquote lifestyle, the way it's written in the book, until they've done their job and procreated, right? And then they can go on and be who they are. So I'm trying to have a slightly different lens in this, where we're considering not only choice, but who we are, who people are, right? Who we are born to be, what our true gender or sexuality is, and how that can be not harnessed, but harmed by political stance or government interference, which we experience in many ways right now. But I think it's not as blatant. And so this novel is kind of taking it to that next level and forcing it to be blatant. And then again, wanting to understand, A, when I'm writing through it, what that means around my own kind of research into this, and then B, how it will be perceived or in the public sphere once the novel is out there.
Why decide to do fiction?
Yeah, I think people don't like having this conversation in the real world, so to speak. It's a difficult conversation for many people on both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, I hate even politicizing it, right? But when you try to talk to people are very heated in their belief systems around women's rights and LGBTQ rights and trans rights. And so my hope or my intention is that by writing this as a fiction novel or a genre novel, it opens up space for people to have conversations about it in a way that doesn't feel so intimidating, or in a way that doesn't feel like you have to be highly intelligent and highly academic in order to understand, all of the variations of everything. You can just simply, hopefully, understand from a human experience.
And you're talking a little bit about it being like a dystopian novel. Yeah. So is it kind of science fiction-y or?
Super science fiction-y.
Cool. Yeah. Are you a science fiction?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I do love a really good dystopian novel, a good sci-fi novel.
Yeah. Yep. Very cool. And also I saw you've been into like film stuff as well.
Yeah, I would say I'm not a filmmaker, but years ago I produced and performed in a film that was women poets of various like ages and genders and sexuality all coming together and creating. I wanted to create a film about who we are here now in this place. So whether we were born and raised in Alberta, or whether we came from somewhere else and made this place our home, who we as women are now, and kind of those pieces and poems threaded and worked together into a film. And it was a really amazing experience.
Just from our conversation already, your focus on women and through research and projects and discussion, why decide to focus on women?
a childlike answer would be because I'm a woman. But I think more than that, I grew up in very rural, conservative Alberta, where expectations of who I was going to be as a woman were kind of placed upon me. Expectations that I didn't follow through with or that were unrealistic for who I was. And I think many young women have that same expectation placed on them, regardless of whether that's a rural conservative expectation or other. And I really wanted to and still want to explore what that does to a young woman before they have a chance to really become who they may not know they are, or who they are supposed to become, or how they want to become. So I think I've always had a lot of questions around the expectation placed on women, the burden placed on women, and it's something that I will probably just always continue to have as a focal point for who I am.
Was that kind of your previous work before coming to MacEwan? Was it arts-based?
Yeah, I've always been in the arts. And it is interesting because, again, I grew up, farm kid, farm daughter.
So I'm curious.
Yeah, with the expectation that I would get married out of high school and make babies and be a farm wife. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what was expected. However, I shouldn't, to be fair, my parents, although they didn't understand me, they did support me wanting to be in the arts. They just didn't understand it. So I fought really hard in order to be a part of the arts community and to kind of follow through with things. But as luck would have it, I did get married young and I did have children young. And then I got divorced young and I was a single mom young and I had to kind of figure it out. And so I actually took the arts and cultural management program when I was a young single mom because I knew I wanted to be in the arts. I knew that's where for sound flaky, that's where my soul was meant to be. But I had to provide for my kids. I had to raise them and keep a roof over their head. So I went to school and I took that program. And it really, truthfully, without trying to sound ridiculous, changed the course of my life. So I have been in the arts forever, for as long as I can, think about, through various roles in the music world, the film world, ran a literary festival for many years here in Edmonton, have managed my own career as an author and a performer. And so, yeah.
That's the nice thing about arts and culture management is you may have one interest, but you can apply it to any different realm of the arts or management even.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm going to get into your poetic memoir that you're releasing in October. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us about this project?
Sure. It's kind of interesting because the last 3 mornings I have been recording the audiobook for it. So my brain is so immersed in this book again now. And I've spent a lot of time questioning again why I do this kind of work. The book is a grief. It's a grief book. My mother was diagnosed with cancer just before COVID hit, the kind of cancer that she would not survive. And so for me, I, being who I am, decided that I was going to write through the experience, not from her lens, but from my lens and what it meant to be the daughter of this woman who is my mother, and to try and understand what grief is and what grief looks like before you're allowed to grieve. So we were grieving a woman who was still alive, right? Which is a horrific thing to have to experience. And so through that book, I came to a lot of more questions about identity, about gender expectations on women when someone is dying, and what that looks like and feels like. So the book itself is really a dissection of grief, or a coming out the other side of grief. I had someone ask me, why do you write, or do you write the wound or do you write the scab? And I said, well, I write through the wound to create a scab because it's the only way that I kind of know how to process these things. And it becomes a part of then my research into the questions around grief and burden of care and women's rights and all of those.
So from there, you, I guess, kind of wrote about your perspective. Did you look at any other, I guess, stories about women's burden of grief?
Yes. So what I found quite interesting is through the writing of this, I'm calling it a memoir because it really brought up a lot of my own, history and my own experiences as a young woman, becoming a young married woman, and now, an aging woman. But in that, I also started questioning in this dissection of grief, or this trying to understand grieving someone who's alive. I started looking for different rituals and ceremonies around death around the world, right? So looking at Buddhist ceremony, Irish wakes, the Tibetan sky burials, Viking water burials, trying to understand all of these different ways that we grieve. And what I found really interesting, which is leading to my new research, is that most cultures, of course, have ceremony and ritual around grieving the dead, but we don't make space for grieving the living, or how to have those, or if there are those rituals to move through almost grief is what I call it. So now I'm moving into this new kind of frame of research of what or how colonialism has shaped or shifted ritual within grief or within women's rights and around that burden of care and that burden of grieving. Yeah.
What would the burden of care kind of look like?
I think it's kind of similar. If we think back to, because you were talking about COVID earlier and how the arts world kind of fell apart, right? There was a lot of conversation during COVID about the burden of care that was placed on women in COVID. We women primarily lost their employment because it was our stereotypical role to be the providers for the children who could not be in school. Also, women are typically, I shouldn't say typically, many women are more likely to work in the arts, because it's the structure around the arts system is sometimes built for women, or has been historically. So when I think about it in that lens, how women took on the burden of loss around COVID, we experienced that from my research within the burden of grieving and loss around when someone's dying. So if you think about, someone, an elderly parent passing or an elderly parent aging and becoming ill, it is often, and again, stereotypically or through the research that I'm doing, the woman that is placed in the position of being the caregiver. So the daughter is often becomes the caregiver, which means in her family she's asked to take on that role. So there is a burden of care that is placed on women around illness, around aging, around death and dying, in a way that just isn't placed on men in this society, in this place here now.
Do you think that there are kind of enough support for women dealing with this?
No, absolutely not, right? I mean, many of us quit our jobs in order to care for aging parents or children. When we talk about grieving and grief, we also can consider, or the burden of care, we can also consider those families who have children that may need some more support, right? It is, again, often the mother or the woman of the family that is asked to take on that role. So are there enough supports? Absolutely not. There aren't. Much of the research that I'm doing as well, when I'm looking at this, other cultures and the way we experience burden of care, or the way it is experienced, and thinking about colonialism and how colonialism has kind of pulled from ritual and ceremony in many families, what we find is that, in particular, that burden, it is, I'm trying to find the right words because I don't want to, this is a research podcast. I don't want to state an opinion without stating the fact, and I don't have documents in front of me. But if we look historically at other cultures around care and family care, we can see, for instance, in Italy, in Italian communities, the families all live together, right? We have large family units living in the home together, caring for the grandchildren or the grandparents, and we're all in a space together. We don't see that in a Western Canadian or colonial kind of culture. And so it's kind of from that lens that I'm looking at this, or I'm doing this research. Yeah.
Was there any specific tradition or culture that kind of stood out the most to you?
At this point, a lot of the research that I'm looking at is around Wiccan, with the history of Wicca, and how that kind of manifested, again, with colonialism and the murdering of witches, which is the murdering of women. But I cannot say at this point that there is specifically a culture ritual, because my research to this date is telling me that, again, the rituals and the ceremonies are typically around the after death part, not the before. So there's much more research that I have to do, right?
We spoke to Terry Cardinal. She was talking about kind of a little bit of the same thing about end of life practices. So it was interesting. But no, I totally agree. We prepare ourselves for the death, but we don't prepare ourselves for what's going to happen before that. Yeah. And I think that's really important to think about, especially I think of my mom, of course, and she's dealt with a lot of death in our family, and that burden for sure, especially with 2 little kids, and you're kind of dealing with everyone, and she was going to school and being a mom. It's a lot. And for sure. So your work is really impactful, and I guess that's probably why you decided to write for people that are experiencing kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and it's just, truly it's around my own curiosity as well. I want to understand how other cultures and women in other cultures are experiencing this as well. And I think it does speak to this entire lens of patriarchy, and also then moves into other realms, right? So I can talk about this as a lens for understanding grief and burden, but then it also branches out into understanding the lens of patriarchy as a whole. So it's a big thing, which could go many ways. Research can sometimes lead you in entirely different directions. I don't know where this will end up in the end, but this is where we're beginning. Yeah,
and it'd be interesting when you said patriarchy, kind of got me thinking. It'd be interesting to see kind of historically. I wonder if a lot of that burden is placed also because a man's role typically was supposed to be the stronger, not as emotional, working sort of thing, to look at kind of that perspective as well.
Yes, but again, is that one society that's saying that, right? Is that based in colonialism? True. And when I look at my research around Wiccan practice, this was because there was a subsect of people who were afraid of strong women doing magic. Come on, healing. Yeah, healers were being targeted. Women were being targeted for taking on leadership roles in communities. So there's many, many layers that will come out of this.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
And it is, do you have any advice for any listeners, faculty, students, or any advice at all?
Trust yourself. There's been many times where I've wondered if my research, because it's not like, the standard academic research road. And I've wondered many times, is this the research I should be doing? Is it what they want to see? But it's what I want to know about. And I think it's what many people want to know about. Trust yourself.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, thank you for being with us today and sharing your story. It was awesome.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Well, that's all we have for today's episode of Research Recasted. If you want to support this podcast, you can visit Research Recasted on your favorite podcast platforms to find new episodes every 2 weeks. Also, don't forget to check us out on Instagram, where you can leave us a like, give us a follow, or send us any follow-up question you have from today's episode. This has been Research Recasted, a knowledge mobilization podcast, brought to you by the Office of Research Services and the Faculty of Fine Arts and Communications at MacEwan University.